Hello and welcome to Spardha Lines, your one-stop destination for the civil services preparation, UPSC, KPSC and other relevant state level examination. In today's Hindu analysis, what we will try and understand are some of the important articles that are important from both pre as well as the mains perspective, from GS paper 1, GS paper 2, GS 3 perspective. Let us try and understand what are these important topics from the examination point of view. Let's look into the first article. The first article says Himalayan blunders that are ravaging the Himalayas. The article here is important from your GS paper 3. One is to do with your environment and ecology, the other is to do with your disaster management. What does this article speak about? The article primarily speaks about massive development that is taking place in the Himalayan states of Himachal Pradesh, Uttarakhand, so on and so forth. Because of these massive development that is taking place in the Himalayan states, this is leading to a lot of disasters, and ultimately we are the sufferers of these disasters. In order to overcome these issues, we need to have sustainable development is what is the gist of this article. This is where the author brings into picture a couple of examples. She also brings into picture that there has been a violation that has been established where the environmental impact assessments that needs to be followed, deliberations needs to be taken into consideration. These have been violated periodically, one because we want to promote tourism at the cost of the people in that particular locality. So let us try and understand what is the author trying to bring about when it comes to this particular article. The author goes on to say, when it comes to the Himalayas, Himalayas happens to be one of the natural beauty. We have the snow-clad mountains, we also have beautiful rivers as well, we also have pilgrimage places in this particular locality. However, when it comes to such places, we have to also give importance to the nature as well. We have to know the limits of the nature as well. If that is not taken into picture, what we will have is the massive disruption, ultimately leading to the loss of economy as well as loss of lives as well. The author brings into the concept that because of these unsustainable practices that have been taking place in the Himalayas, what we have seen is the tragedies because of the fall of the bridges, roads, buildings being swept by the raging rivers. These places like the Himalayas, where you have states like Himachal Pradesh, you have states like Uttarakhand, yes, development needs to take place, but this is not at the cost of the nature and the environment, says the author. When it is at the cost of the environment, what could happen? It could result in landslides, it could result in sinking as we saw in Joshimath in Uttarakhand, and ultimately land would subside and people would not be able to live in this particular area, leading to the economic losses. And when there is economic losses, they stop living in this locality. They will have what is called as environmental refugee crisis. What is this concept of environmental refugees? When we speak about environmental refugees, what would happen? There might be people who will be living in that area for a very long period of time. It can be decades, it can also be centuries as well. When such people are living in a locality, they would get acclimatized to that particular region. They would also start developing relations with other sections of the people. But what would happen? Because of the human induced anthropogenic factors, these people would not be able to live in that particular area because there is sinking of the area. One such example is Joshimath, where the land has sunk. There are other examples as well. Let me take you to the state of West Bengal. In the state of West Bengal, what we are actually witnessing is erosion along the coastal region. So it is the ocean water, the sea, which eats up that particular piece of land. This is also happening in the state of Kerala as well. So because of the erosion, a certain land is eaten by the nature, and as a result, these people who would have been living in that area for a very long period of time will have to move to a different region. So they might have lost their lands, they might have lost their agricultural lands, they might have lost everything that they have gained over a past century or so. This could lead to environmental refugees. So refugees not from another country, but refugees from one region to another, from one place to another, all because of the anthropogenic induced factors. So the author goes on to say that because of these unsustainable practices, what we are witnessing is these environmental refugees who move from one place to another. This is also leading to deaths as well. So the major problem would be because of these unsustainable practices, what we are witnessing is landslide, sinking, economic loss, loss of lives, death, leading to the major problem to the people in that part of the region. The author takes into example the recent development of the Chardham project. What is this Chardham project? Chardham Mahamarg Vikas Pariyojana basically looks at developing 900 km of road widening to double laning with a paved shoulder, which has a design of 12 meter, which was implemented in the Garhwal region and a short stretch of Kumaon in the Uttarakhand region. So this happens to be a project. Primarily it has two important objectives. One is with reference to the tourism, the other is with respect to the national security. The author goes on to say that whenever a project is coming into picture, let's say for example the Chardham Mahamarg Vikas Pariyojana, which happens to be an infrastructural project, the major intent is not just about development of the infrastructure per se, but there is a larger hidden agenda as well, that is to do with the politics of the state. What we also know for the fact is that when it comes to the politics, they all want to capture what is called as the vote bank. In order to capture this vote bank, they bring massive changes in the form of tourism developmental projects, because when there is tourism developmental projects, obviously there is development. When there is development, this will also bring in a lot of money as well, but this bringing of the money to the people of that region will be at the cost of the environment, and when the nature throws its fury at us, it is the loss of economy and loss of lives. This is not taken up by the politicians. They do not look at the long-term perspective, a larger vision, but all that they have is a myopic viewpoint in order to develop the tourism in that part of the state. And as a result of tourism projects, what we actually see is they have to widen the roads, because there have to be people who have to push through these roads, and ultimately there are these forest covers, there are these trees that are present for a very long period of time. These have to be opened up, these have to be felled, so the trees and the forest cover over a period of time has reduced. This has also choked water resources in that part of the region, and ultimately when you have the trees which are able to withstand the landslides, how are they able to withstand the landslides? Let's say for example, you have these trees whose roots go deep into the earth. When you remove this part of the tree, you will have these landslides that will obviously open up. Why? Because the trees and the roots are able to stop it. But then what do? We say we will have Campa, we will say we will have an afforestation program in some other region. So will these landslides be stopped because of the afforestation program in some other region? No, this is the basic minimal logic that we are missing. So the landslides are prevented primarily because these trees, which have been there for decades together, are able to withstand the soil and the pressure that is coming from the slopes of the mountains. But that is not taken into picture, and ultimately because of the felling of the trees, because we have to broaden these roads, what could happen? This could result in felling of the trees and the landslides, and this creates death in that locality. So the major problem is the trees and the forest lands have been removed. This has also choked the water resources as well, and these projects are not serving the people per se, but they have become the major disaster projects. 100 kilometers generally, this project is more than about 100 kilometers. When a project which is more than 100 kilometers is to be taken into picture, what it requires is an environmental clearance from the central ministry as well as other departments with respect to the environmental impact assessment. In order to make sure that this particular project is not just taken as 100 kilometer project. Why? Because when it is 100 kilometer project, this will require the permission from the central ministry department, so on and so forth. So let's 100 kilometer project, let's break them into compartments. This 100 kilometer project will be broken down into 15 kilometer project, it will be broken down into 30 kilometer project, it will be broken down into 50 kilometer project. So only if there is a 100 kilometer project, this will require the permission. But what if it is a 15 kilometer project? These permissions will not be required. So let's intelligence in breaking down these projects so that this will not require the permission from the central ministry, this will not require the permission from the environmental impact assessment. So picture, it will show that it is a small projects which connected approach and not 100-kilometer long projects. When we have these small projects, this will not require the permission of the environmental impact assessments and the environment ministry. So let's go ahead with these projects, which small projects is the intention of the ministries, that is the political masters, which ultimately is the major problem for the entire country. What does the author further say? The author further goes on to say that the dense forest around Chambal, Arkal Mehta, Shivpuri, Rudraprayag, Chamoli, Agasthamuni, Karnaprayag, Kund and other such lush green areas are vanishing. Amid the rapacious nature of the Chardham Maharang Vikas Pariyojana, only one pristine patch, that is Bhagirathi eco-sensitive zone, remains. Rest of the other places where these projects are being developed, the pristine nature of the environment is completely destroyed. However, it is only the Bhagirathi eco-sensitive zone which remains as it is, and it is the only natural free flow that is left of the Ganga river and was also declared as a protected site in December 2012 under the Environment Protection Act of 1986. In fact, when you look at this whole development of the projects, there were guidelines that were prescribed by the Supreme Court. These guidelines were yet not followed. There were hasty approvals that were given by the ministries as well as departments. As I told you, the 100-kilometer project, which should have required the environmental impact assessment, is not taken into picture because they've used their political nuances and their intelligence and broken down this project into smaller projects, and the mandatory and the detailed environmental impact assessment was not done for any of these projects. Despite the Supreme Court giving the guidelines, it was yet not followed for the development of this particular project. In fact, the BESZ monitoring committee's approval was overseen by the state officials on the committee without any discussions, deliberations and the suggestions. Despite a clear protocol, despite the standard operating procedure, despite the rules that have already been established as to how permission has to be given, this is not considered by the state officials. In fact, we also have the Supreme Court, which reprimanded the ministry and also directed the implementation of its own notification both prospectively and retrospectively whenever they are coming up with a mechanism for the development of the infrastructure projects. But yet the government comes up with an aptitude of national security. It says that these roads will have to be developed for the interest of the national security, and when the question of national security steps into picture, the Supreme Court does not offer any assistance. It means it does not offer any suggestions as well, and they go ahead with the execution of this particular project. The Uttarakhand government increased the carrying capacity of the Chardhams, while the carrying capacity for the Gangotri shrine was increased to 9,000 passenger carrying units per day, even though the notification calls for a regulation of the vehicular traffic. Despite all these issues, they continue to go ahead with the project, and this has raked up couple of issues for the humans. So what is the major issue? Whenever there is an area where the infrastructure development project is coming up, they will have its own share of problems. These share of problems will require solutions. The solutions will primarily look at local areas. What are the environmental resources that are present in that particular locality? Is there a river that is flowing by? If there is a construction of the hydroelectricity projects, if there is development of the infrastructure project, what could be the likely repercussions? This has to be on an independent basis. So what has the government done? The government has come up with one size fits all approach for all areas. This should not be the way ahead. So one size fits all approach to environmental clearance should not be followed, especially for the ecological sensitive areas like the Gangotri glacier. In this part where there is glacier, where there is flow of river, what we are actually witnessing is a problem in the Himalayas where there is excessive climate change induced factors which is resulting in faster melting of the glaciers. Why is it resulting in the faster melting of the glaciers? That is because of the developmental projects that we have taken up in the Himalayan belt. When such projects are present, there is lack of the green cover. The green cover would be reduced over a period of time. All the forests that have been able to suck up the excessive carbon, they are no more able to hold up the carbon. They re-release this carbon into the environment, and when they re-release, there is massive or increase of melting of glaciers, which is ultimately harming this ecological system in that part of the Himalayan belt. So what is the author suggesting? The author goes on to say that yes, environment is to be taken into picture, but development also has to go hand in hand with the sustainable development. So what is that we can do? Instead of coming up with wide width roads, what we can do is upgradation of the roads to an intermediate road width that will have minimum environmental impact. That is the only possible and sustainable solution. Instead of two width roads, what we can to come up with is the intermediate road width, so that this will not be at the cost of the environment. So if we have just one lane or two lane, not four lanes, so on and so forth, this can ultimately reduce the impact, says the author. It is this that we have to understand with respect to this article. Now let's look into the next article. This article here is speaking about the Rohingyas and the issues. The author here has taken one-sided view, but we will also look at the larger picture of national security when it comes to such issues. Taking into picture what the author has also discussed, let's bring in another viewpoint with respect to the Rohingyas as well. First, we have to understand the meaning of migrants and the refugees. Who is a migrant? Let's assume for a moment I am a person. I am an engineer turned litigator. I am an engineer. I am an advocate who's practicing before the High Court of Karnataka. Now let's say I as a person, I have broader dreams. So what do? I leave from the state of Karnataka. I stop my practice in the state of Karnataka, let's say in the High Court of Karnataka, and I want to move and practice on the international front. So I start moving to United States of America, or let's say I start moving towards United Kingdom. So I as a person am willfully leaving the state of Karnataka, my country India, and moving to United States of America or to United Kingdom. So I am voluntarily moving from India to United States of America because I have an ambitious life. I want to make sure that I have this and that. I want more credentials for myself. I want to have more accomplishments to my name. I also want to be rich as well. So these are the personal interests that I have. So I voluntarily move from one country to another or from one region to another, primarily because of my ambitions that I have put in place. So a person moving voluntarily from one country to another or from one region to another is called as a migrant who has his own share of interest. Now, when you consider the refugee, who happens to be the refugee? A refugee is a person who is not moving from one region to another or from one country to another on a voluntarily basis, but there is a circumstance, an environment or a toxic environment that is created either because of the political manifestations that is taking place or because my life is under threat in that particular country. So these are not voluntary movements, but because a chaos is created, ruckus is created, my life could be a threat, my life could be in danger, my immediate family members' life could be in danger. I'm not moving voluntarily because I want to increase my passion towards life, but because the circumstances has been created which is making me move from one country to another. So when we speak about refugees, these are the people who move from one country to another, one region to another, primarily not because they want to move voluntarily, because the circumstances are such, the political that the violence created in that part is such that they are made to move from one country to another. It can be political, it can be racial, it can be religion, it can also be language specific wars that have taken place in a particular region, and as a result people move from one country to another. Let me give you examples. Let's take the example of what happened in Tibet. Tibet, you had Buddhists who are practicing their own religion. China takes over Tibet. So what you have is Tibetan refugees who come from Tibet to India. One such example, let me give you another example. Let's say we have Sri Lanka. What happens? There are clashes between Sinhalese and the Tamilian population of Sri Lanka. So the Tamilian population of Sri Lanka who moved from India to Sri Lanka, now their rights are not being given in the state of Sri Lanka. So what do? They start moving from Sri Lanka towards Tamil Nadu to India. This is another example, and one such recent example that we have is because of the Rohingyas. So when it comes to the Tibet, it was more about the capture of the territory, so they had to move into India. Then when it comes to Sri Lanka, it was more about language and the rights, so they had to move towards India. And now what we have is Rohingyas. These are the Rohingyas who are the minorities in the Buddhist majority in Myanmar, and as a result, when their rights were taken off, they had to suffer large scale human right violations, and they move from Myanmar to countries like Bangladesh as well as India. So who are these refugees? Refugees are the people who move from one country to another or from one region to another, not voluntarily, but because there has been a political scenario, a racial discrimination or a religious discrimination or a language discrimination, because in order to withstand the pressures in that particular region, in order to save the lives of themselves as well as their near and dear ones, they move to another country, not voluntarily, but because of the pressure created in their own country. Who regulates these refugees? When it comes to the refugees, we have the United Nations Human Rights Council, which generally regulates it. But taking into picture whether a country is signatory to the 1951 Refugee Convention or its 1967 protocol. So remember, we have the 1951 Refugee Convention. Is India part of the 1951 Refugee Convention? No, we are not part of the 1951 Refugee Convention, and at the same time, we are also not part of the 1967 protocol as well. Since India is not part of these conventions and the protocols, India will have its own refugee convention, which means to say India can come up with its own domestic laws. India can also follow or will not follow some of the international conventions. If they are part of the 1951 convention and the 1967 protocol, this will be regulated by the convention and the protocol. But since India is not part of 1951 Refugee Convention and the 1967 protocol, the author in this particular case goes on to say India regulates it on the basis of its own rules and regulations. Do we have a domestic law with respect to the refugees? As of now, we do not have any law when it comes to the refugees. All that we have is the executive, which are making their own laws, and at the same time, most of it are regulated by the Foreigners Act of 1946. And this is what the author says, that since India is not part of these international conventions, we do not have the domestic laws, we are violating some of the conventions internationally. So we have one of the important laws, that is UN Convention on the Rights of the Child. This can be another important point from the preliminary examination point of view. Article 6 of the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child says that every child has an inherent right to life, survival and development, and India has ratified this convention in the year 1992. Since India is part of it, India will have to take care of the children, but then there are these domestic laws which are not present, and India by its own Foreigners Act goes and regulates these refugees. But then there are these Rohingyas. The Rohingyas are present in the state of Jammu and Kashmir. These Rohingyas also have their children as well. They are detained in that particular center, and as a result, they do not have the freedom, and it hence is violating the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child, says the author. But this is where we have to look at it from another perspective. Yes, the author may be right, but there is another perspective as well. India is not part of the 1951 convention, so we need not have to follow the refugee convention because India is not signatory to it. And executive also have the right to decide whether that particular person can stay in India or not. India, being having a big heart, has accommodated the Rohingyas. But there are also executive reports. These are the executive reports that have been given by the Intelligence Bureau as well as raw external agency as well. What does it say? That few. Let me make it very clear that there are very few Rohingyas, there are few people who are within this particular locality who have had conversations with the extremist organizations from another country. So there are few people from this Rohingya population, I'm making it very sure that it is only few who had conversations with the extremist organizations. So what is that India is trying to say? Since there are these few individuals who are part of having an interaction with the extremist organization, they may influence a larger section. As of now, it is only a very small pocket of the people who are influenced. Maybe in the near future, these small sections may also influence. We are not saying they will influence, they may influence a larger section as well. So as and when they influence the larger section, this can create a public order, law and order issue. In order to control it, they are being kept under a close watch of the executive. Is it wrong? Not at all. Because we have the reports from the intelligence bureau and the external agency that very few of them are in conversation with the extremist organization. So they are kept under check. They are kept under the close eyes of the executive. So that is why when taken care like this, when they are under the close eyes of the executive, obviously their progeny, their children will also have to be kept under check in this particular locality. You cannot take out the children take them off and put them under a different ambit altogether. No, they require the assistance of their parents and their near and dear ones as well as the guardians. So as a result, these people are kept under a particular detention center, and as a result, because the adults are kept, children may have to be kept is another perspective. Whatever the author is saying may be right as well, but the other side is also an external prerogative. It is the prerogative of the executive to decide whether it is good for the national security or not. And as a result, the author in this particular case goes on to say that in few pockets where there is large scale detention, these children's rights will have to be respected. Yes, the author is right about it, but at the same time, the executive will have certain rights to take care of its own set of people, and as a result, they have kept them separately so that the public order is kept check with respect to the reports of the intelligence bureau. Now let's look into the next article. This article says the importance of states in the space missions. The article primarily goes on to speak about three stakeholders. Who are these three stakeholders? One is the state, which is the government of that particular country. Then you have the private sector. Then also have the people as a whole who become the major stakeholders when it comes to the space missions world over. The author goes on to say, yes, when it comes to few pockets, it is the private sector which is working out in the space missions. And at the same time, there are people who are also giving their push to these missions that are taking place, the space missions. But it is primarily the state, that is the government, which is pushing the agenda. What is the basis of it? That countries have been able to achieve these space missions. The author takes into picture, it is not just the states, it is not just the private sector, it is not just the people per se, but the larger will as well. This is what the author says in this article and also substantiates the same with the help of an example. The author also brings into picture that many Western powers, if you look at newspapers, if you look at England journalists as well as United States of America, when India achieved the Chandrayaan-1 and missions prior to that as well, you had countries like United States of America and their newspapers who throw up these cartoons with arrogance. The arrogance is that there is an elite club. This elite club will basically have countries like United States of America and other Western powers in one compartment, and you will also have India with a man who comes with a cow knocking the doors of this elite club. Such is the abysmal state and the poor state and the taste of these people that they are mocking another country which has had the great instant success like India with bare minimal cost. Added to it, there are also people who are also questioning India as well, saying that India does not have its population who do not have the toilets. India is a poor country, that's what is their perception, and why should India deviate or put this amount of money to the space development programs while we do not have this basic infrastructure. So the author also brings this into the picture as well. First, let us understand how are countries like United States of America achieving it, because they have exceptional human resource. They also have the per capita income. They also make a huge amount of investments. This is with respect to United States of America. But what is to do with Russia, China and India? The author goes on to say, by some estimates, the USSR was 50 to 60% of the size of the US economy in the 1960s when it landed the first spacecraft Luna 9 on the moon. According to World Bank data, when measuring in purchasing power parity terms, China's per capita income was around 22% that of United States of America in 2013 at the time of its moon landing. In contrast, India's per capita income in 2022 was only 10.9% that of the United States of America. Despite these issues, despite not having enough resources, how is that they are able to do it? That is because of their population. When you consider all these countries, they have huge population, they have huge resources, you have ambitious people who are wanting to accomplish something in their lives. So apart from the human resource, apart from the money resources, what drives these countries are the human resources, and at the same time they would have made huge investments when it comes to the science and technology programs as well. So these countries have the human resource, they have the huge population. They also know for the fact that since they have these huge populations, a constant endeavor in the form of investments in the science and technology will have to be taken into picture, primarily because they have to feed their huge population, and science and technology is the way ahead. In fact, many countries like China and India have invested more on science and technology, which is now reaping the benefits of it. The author also takes the example of China. China, for instance, filed the most patents in the world in the year 2019. In the year 2019, it has filed massive number of patents. Why? Because it has made investments in the science and technology. So on one side, United States of America has money power. It also has the human resources as well. But when it comes to countries like India or Russia or China, it is more about human resources which are pushing these countries. For example, the Chandrayaan 3 has been accomplished with an investment of about 600 crores. Compare it with what United States of America has done. It has invested more than 2000 crores for this particular project. So it means we have the human intelligence which is also able to reduce the investments made in the space program. This is on the one side. On the other side, a country like United Arab Emirates does not have the human resources. So what have they done? They are rich. They also have a lot of money as well, but they are also taking the assistance of other countries. So on one side, the passion of the human resources, on the other side, it is the will of the country. The author takes the example of United Arab Emirates, which launched the project Hope probe that entered Martian orbit in 2021, and this was done with the help of the Japanese Space Agency. So the UAE Space Agencies was only inaugurated in 2014, and their model basically looks at triple helix model, which is the support of the government, the private sector as well as the academics. So what they require is the will. So on one side, the author takes into picture these space developed projects are a requirement, because on one side it is not just United States of America, but the resources, the human will is what is required, says the author. And at the same time, the author takes into picture the second important pointer, that there are issues within United States of America which they may not take it seriously. One such example is whether developing economies with problems such as poverty can afford the diversion of valuable resources to such ambitious programs. This is where the author takes the example of United States of America. In the documentary Summer of Soul, African American participants at a music festival in 1969 held at Harlem, New York, expressed their their opposition to Neil Armstrong's historic moon landing. They cited civic infrastructure and racism as issues requiring urgent action and said that the space program diverted resources and attention, yet the Apollo missions are considered triumph on the part of the humanity. When United States of America or any developed country says that we have poverty in India or in any of the developing countries, why are they diverting the funds from these poverty-stricken programs to the space-related programs, which should not be done? One such example is the author trying to bring in. He says back in the 1970s, when United States of America came up with programs with respect to the moon mission, so on and so forth, the African Americans who were present in United States of America felt there are racial issues, there are infrastructural issues, the African Americans are not provided the affirmative action, they are not provided the health related schemes and programs. While this is the major cause of issue, why is United States of America developing these space related programs at the cost of the African Americans? Yes, there will be issues in any country, there might be poverty issues as well, there might be racial issues as well, but then there also has to be a larger canvas of the science and developmental progress which has to keep on and on. So that is what the author says. Despite the poverty and other infrastructural lacunae that a particular country may have, other science and developmental projects will also have to keep going on and on. What does it do? When India develops a particular Chandrayaan project at just 600 rupees, it is not only showing that it is able to achieve this particular project, it is also meeting the cost efficiency as well. So next time another country, let's say a third country like Indonesia or any other country which does not have a space related program, wants to launch its own satellite, it will prefer India for its particular program because the cost at which it is able to accomplish all these achievements will be at a very low cost. So it will also have the ancillary benefits. So other countries would want to launch their satellites with the help of Indian programs. So while we have issues, yes, we will overcome with the issues like poverty. We will also come up with infrastructural projects as well. But this should not be at the cost of science and technology related projects. So the author goes on to say, yes, both needs to go hand in hand. When such questions are being raised by the developed countries, we have to show them their mirror, we have to reflect them upon their own thoughts as to what their countrymen have been voicing their opinion against its own government. The multiple crises besetting the world indicate the inability of the private sector to tackle them unaided. The dichotomy between the state and the markets, where the state is simply a referee, is no longer valid. What is required is a true partnership between the two with active intervention of the state in order to provide the space for ingenuity to flourish. The author finally goes on to say, apart from this, we have the state, which is the government agencies which is running most of the space related program. If we have to take this example of United States of America, what we have is NASA. But apart from NASA, of late, what we have is SpaceX. We also have Falcon as well. So there are many private sector entities which are coming up with their own programs. For example, we have SpaceX, we also have Amazon's Falcon, so on and so forth. So each of these private sector are also putting in a lot of money. The state has a massive expanse of the monetary advantages. So when the private sector is not able to invest in the private sector is not able to invest in the space sector, it is the state which has to enter. It is the state which has to infuse the money. But when the space industry is also has the private sector involvement, this should go hand in hand. It should not be a competition, but it should be a mutual harmony, says the author. Just like how the state is able to enter, infuse innovation, when the private sector can be accommodated as well, they would also bring in a massive innovation. So the state and its authorities and its programs should go hand in hand with the private sector. For example, in India, what we have is ISRO, which happens to be a state entity. While state entity is developing its own programs, what we require is the assistance of the private sector. So that what we have is harmony between the state and the private entities is what is this article all about. Now let's look into the next article. This article is speaking about the undersea tunnel. The article here is speaking about three important parameters from the preliminary examination point of view. One, it says that there will be undersea tunnel that will be coming up in the state of Kerala. It also makes a mention of this Vyapeen Island. Where is this Vyapeen Island? It can be very important from the preliminary examination point of view. The Vyapeen Island happens to be an island in the state of Kerala. So what is Kerala planning to come up with? It is planning to come up with a tunnel in the Arabian Sea, and that will be an internal tunnel, is what is this article speaking about. The author also brings into picture what is called as the Channel Tunnel, which is built across the English Channel, connecting the Folkestone in Kent in the United Kingdom with Cogules in France in about 50 km long. This could be another important preliminary point. And then we also have the second tunnel, which is about 53.9 km. Where is it? It is in the country of Japan. So all these tunnels could be prospectively asked in your preliminary examination. So the second tunnel is in the country of Japan. Channel Tunnel is connecting United Kingdom with France. Then we have the Vyapeen Island, which is in the state of Kerala. When we speak about such development, what could be the consequences when we have these tunnels that are constructed in the sea? What are the advantages? One, what we have is the road, we also have is the railways, and when we construct such tunnels, the amount of density of vehicles on the roads will comparatively reduce, and at the same time we are providing an alternative ways of transportation, and this could propose more coastal highways as well. The congestion on the lands will ultimately reduce, and what we are providing is an alternative to the national transportation network. Added to it, we will also save a lot of time and energy. When you travel via the roads, this will consume a lot of fuel as well. This will also means that there is a lot of congestion and traffic as well. So more time, more energy, more fuel that is spent. If you are making use of these channels, this will all be reduced, and at the same time this will also create new employment opportunities, and we would also be able to explore new innovative thoughts as well. So this is the advantage of such undersea tunnel, and this can be very important from the mains fodder point of view. For example, if there is a question about transportation which says what are the alternative sources of transportation, one is road, the other is railways, then you have the aircraft, then under the water what you have these undersea tunnels which can be an alternative. So this can act as the fodder for your mains answer rating. Now let's look into the next article. This article says PIL Stokes debate on inmates' right to conjugal visits. What are these conjugal rights? Conjugal rights are the rights of the husband and wife after they are married. So a person gets married. So immediately after they are married, the rights that the husband, that is the spouse of each other, get is what is called as conjugal rights. So what happens with respect to inmates? Let's say there is a person who's committed an act, he is thrown behind bars, he is convicted. So once he is thrown behind bars, he will be in the prison for his entire life or for a specific period of time. So after he is inside the prison, should conjugal visits be promoted or not? Let's say there is a person who's committed a murder, he is thrown behind bars for about 14 years or 20 years. Should his wife be allowed to meet him in person, whether they should be having a private conversation within the boundaries of the jail? Yes, is what is this article speaking about. Few people say yes, they should be promoted, that conjugal rights should be promoted for all those jail inmates. One point of view. There is another point of view which is that this should not be allowed. Why it should be allowed is what is this article all about. We have the United Nations Standard Minimal Rules for the Treatment of the Prisoners, the Universal Declaration of the Human Rights, the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. These say that whenever there is a person who might have committed an act, an illegal act, and he is convicted and he is going through a reformative process, what we are trying to transform is this individual who has committed an heinous offense. So what we have is reformative justice in most of the countries in the country. If this person who is going through reformative justice is not allowed to keep in touch with his family, with his wife, he will not have any sort of relationship. What sort of society are we trying to create when he is not able to speak to his own wife in private? If that is not there, when the conjugal visits are not there, he would not be able to continue the relationship with his family, and ultimately this person who is in jail will not be able to understand the issues of his family. He will not be able to continue the relationship with his family. So conjugal rights will have to be promoted even after he enters and is convicted behind bars, because this will support the emotional attitude, this will support the mental stress he is going to, and ultimately he'll continue and de-stress this entire atmosphere. The Supreme Court has also clarified this, that in case of Sunil Batra versus Delhi administration, Justice Iyer observed the visit to prisoners by family and friends are solace in isolation, are only a dehumanized system, and can derive vicarious delight in depriving prison inmates of this human amenity. So they have to be given time to spend with their families, and especially conjugal rights with their spouse is the need of the hour. Apart from this, this happens to be the fundamental for all the prisoners, because Article 21 also says that this individual will have to live with dignity, this individual will also have to live with life in life as well. So this person whose life is his family, if the family is not allowed to speak, especially his wife, this is violating Article 21 of the Indian Constitution. Added to it, prisoners are also given right to life and personal liberty. There are also conjugal visits, which are part of many international treaties as well, and this will also prevent the sexual aggression of the prisoners, and at the same time this will also reduce the rates of homosexuality as well, and this will also create positive psychological benefit to the prisoners, is what is that we have to understand with this article. So basically, if conjugal rights are allowed for a person, if this will create more positive outcome for that person, is what is this article all about. Now let's look into the next article. This article here is speaking about Basmati rice. Let's look at some of the important facts with respect to the Basmati rice. It is a variety of long slender grained aromatic rice which is traditionally grown in India, Pakistan and Nepal. According to Indian Agricultural Processed Foods Export Development Authority, this is a rice variety which is eligible to called Basmati if it has a minimum average pre-cooked milled rice length of 6.61 mm and average pre-cooked milled rice breadth of up to 2 mm among other parameters, and India happens to be one of the countries which is the largest production of Basmati rice. India accounts for over 70% of the world's Basmati rice production. The areas which have a geographical indication for Basmati production in India are the states of Punjab, Haryana, Himachal Pradesh, Delhi, Uttarakhand, Western Uttar Pradesh and Jammu and Kashmir. These are the states which produce a lot of Basmati rice. These are very important from the preliminary examination point of view. This is it for today. In case you're liking these initiatives, please do like, subscribe to our YouTube channel and also share it with your fellow aspirants. This is it for today. Thank you for watching. All the best.